The first insult of the evening arrived before the soup. It came from Lady Blanche Trescott, with the softness of a compliment and the precision of a blade. "Miss Trescott, you may sit there. It's nearer the service door, which will be convenient if Lady Imogen requires you." A footman paused beside the last chair at the far end of Larkstone Hall's dining table. The place stood beyond the youngest curate's wife, and opposite an empty seat intended for no guest of consequence. Winifred crossed the candlelit room without allowing her pace to change. She had learned years ago that humiliation pleased its author most when it altered the body. A lowered head, a hurried step, a flushed cheek. Lady Blanche would receive none of them. "Thank you, my lady," Winifred said, and took the chair. Beyond the tall windows, dusk had settled over the North Yorkshire hills. Inside, silver gleamed beneath branching candles, crystal caught small fires, and ancestral Bramford faces watched from dark portraits as though rank itself had gathered to dine. Winifred wore a plain grey gown with a narrow white collar. It was respectable, carefully brushed, and 4 seasons old. Lady Blanche's eyes had rested on the cuffs long enough to notice where Winifred had mended them. That afternoon, Lady Imogen had bent over a copybook in the schoolroom and written her own name without the second M. When Winifred pointed to the mistake, the 13-year-old had groaned and reached for the page. "Don't tear it," Winifred had said. "Why not? It's wrong." "Because correcting a name teaches more than destroying it." She had taken the small wooden hornbook from her pocket and placed it between them. The wood had been worn smooth by 2 generations of fingers. On its back, beneath scratches and years of handling, a careful hand had carved. "For my Winifred Ruth. My mother taught me from this," Winifred had said. She believed a name should be written exactly. One careless letter may send a message to the wrong person. Imogen had studied the inscription. "Did she always call you Winifred Ruth?" "Always." The girl had rewritten her name without complaint. Now, the hornbook rested in Winifred's pocket beneath the table, its familiar weight against her skirt. Lady Imogen sat halfway along the opposite side, pale after the headache that had caused Lady Blanche to insist the governess attend dinner. "A child may require correction at any hour," Lady Blanche had said. Yet Imogen had been given no choice in the matter, and neither had Winifred. The soup was served. Conversation moved from the York Assembly Rooms to a disputed road near Thirsk. Winifred listened without appearing to do so. Governesses were expected to possess enough intelligence to educate children and too little presence to reveal it among adults. A gentleman with silver whiskers complained that Hazelcombe's lower tenant fields had flooded because the property lay south of the River Swale. North, Winifred said before caution could stop truth. The word was quiet, but the table heard it. The gentleman turned. "I beg your pardon." Winifred set down her spoon. "The lower Hazelcombe fields lie north of that branch of the river, sir. The water reaches them from the western drainage cut, not from the south bank." Lady Blanche's smile thinned. A governess should be careful when correcting a gentleman in his host's dining room. "Geography does not change according to the speaker's rank, my lady." A silence followed. Lady Imogen looked down quickly, though pride showed at the corner of her mouth. The gentleman gave a small laugh. "You speak with great certainty for someone who has no business with the land. I have passed it often enough to know where it stands." "From a carriage window?" Lady Blanche asked. "How fortunate. 4 years in a ducal household have given you opinions as well as employment." The curate's wife examined her plate. No one intervened. Winifred felt the old familiar pressure to make herself smaller, so others could call themselves kind. She resisted it. Employment requires observation, my lady. It requires gratitude. The two are not enemies. Lady Blanche's eyes cooled. Before she could reply, the dining room doors opened. Sir Rupert Trescott entered with the butler behind him. He had arrived at Larkstone less than an hour earlier and changed quickly for dinner. At 58, he remained broad-shouldered and upright, with iron-grey hair and a face that society considered distinguished because it rarely displayed doubt. Winifred had not seen him in 7 years. He looked at her as one might look at a piece of furniture remembered from another house. "Winifred," he said, "still teaching other people's children. Still doing useful work, Sir Rupert." He took the empty chair midway down the table. "Your position has made you bold. Distance sometimes makes plain speech easier." Lady Blanche gave a soft laugh. "Miss Trescott has been instructing us about Hazelcombe." Sir Rupert unfolded his napkin. "Has she?" "She claims a superior knowledge of its boundaries." His gaze returned to Winifred. "A dependent should be cautious when speaking of property. A direction is not a claim." "No, but longing often disguises itself as knowledge." Winifred's hand closed around the edge of her napkin beneath the table. Sir Rupert had used the word dependent throughout her childhood. It had excused every withheld answer, every reduced allowance, every introduction in which her parentage became an inconvenience. "You once told me Hazelcombe belonged to a branch of the family," she said. "You never said which branch. Because it was not your concern. You made many things no concern of mine." His mouth tightened. "And yet you were fed, clothed, and educated. Gratitude does not require me to pretend north is south." Lady Imogen's spoon touched her plate with a small, sharp sound. "Miss Trescott is right," she said. Lady Blanche turned toward her. "Imogen, you will not enter this discussion." "But she is." "Enough." Sir Rupert leaned back, studying Winifred with open displeasure. "Hazelcombe has remained in proper hands. That is all you need, understand." "Proper, according to whom?" "According to law, family, and common sense." "Then one of those should be able to answer a simple question." "What question?" Winifred heard her own pulse, steady and hard. "Whose hands?" Several guests stopped pretending not to listen. Sir Rupert's expression changed, not into anger, but into the cold patience he had once used when denying her a letter or ending an inquiry about her mother. "You have mistaken service in a noble house for standing within one." "I have mistaken nothing." "Then remember yourself. No acre of Yorkshire bears the name of a penniless governess." The words settled over the white linen. Lady Blanche lowered her eyes with the satisfied calm of a hostess whose most uncomfortable guest had finally been put in place. Winifred felt the hornbook against her hip. For my Winifred Ruth, her mother's hand had named her with care. Sir Rupert had spent years speaking as though the name carried no weight at all. Winifred lifted her chin. "Poverty may describe my purse, Sir Rupert. It does not describe the truth." A voice came from the open doorway. "Then perhaps we should allow the truth to describe itself." Every face turned. Lawrence Bramford, Duke of Corbridge, stood beneath the carved oak arch in a black travelling coat, rain still darkening one shoulder. He had returned from York without sending word ahead. One gloved hand held a morocco folio secured by a dark ribbon. His gaze moved first to Winifred, then to Sir Rupert. He had heard enough. The room seemed to alter around him, not because he raised his voice. He did not. Authority entered more completely when it had no need to announce itself. "Your Grace," Lady Blanche said, recovering first. "We were not expecting you until tomorrow." Plainly. Lawrence walked to the table. He did not take his usual place at the head. He stopped beside Winifred's chair, close enough that she could see rain beaded along the edge of his cuff. "Sir Rupert," he said, "did I hear you claim that no acre in Yorkshire bears Miss Trescott's name?" Sir Rupert's fingers stilled upon his wineglass. "A family observation, Your Grace, nothing more. Then you will have no objection to repeating it." Lawrence placed the folio on the white tablecloth between them. The leather made a muted sound against the silver and china. Sir Rupert looked at the folio. For the first time that evening, confidence left his face. Lawrence rested 2 fingers on the ribbon. "Say it again," he said, "after you have seen what I brought from the Bramford deed chest." No one moved. Winifred felt every eye at the table turn from her worn cuffs to the document beneath the Duke's hand. Lawrence untied the ribbon. The ribbon fell open across the white tablecloth, and the room seemed to draw one careful breath. Lawrence lifted the deed from the morocco folio with both hands. The parchment was yellowed at the folds, but intact, its seals still visible beneath the candlelight. He did not hand it to Sir Rupert. He did not place it before Lady Blanche. He turned it so, the opening lines faced him, and read in a voice quiet enough to compel attention. "An instrument of settlement executed on the 12th day of June, 1846, concerning Hazelcombe Grange, its lands, rents, revenues, and appurtenances." Sir Rupert's wineglass remained untouched. Winifred watched the tendons tighten along his hand. Lawrence continued, "The property is settled upon Miss Winifred Ruth Trescott, only surviving daughter of Ruth Hart Trescott. Possession and beneficial enjoyment to pass upon her 25th birthday." The words reached Winifred one at a time. Miss Winifred Ruth Trescott. Her name did not sound larger in the Duke's voice. It sounded exact. That was worse. Exactness left no refuge for the years in which she had been told she belonged nowhere. Lady Imogen looked across the table at her with wide eyes. Lady Blanche gave a short, disbelieving laugh. There must be some error. Lawrence did not look up. The wording is unambiguous. Old settlements are often overtaken by later arrangements. Then Sir Rupert may produce them. Sir Rupert's face had lost its earlier colour, though his posture remained composed. "Your Grace, that document cannot mean what you suppose." "I have not yet said what I suppose." Lawrence traced the line with one gloved finger. "I have read what it says." Winifred's spoon lay beside her untouched plate. She could not remember setting it down. "My 25th birthday," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Lawrence looked at her. "Yes, I am 28, I know. 3 years." The number entered her more sharply than the estate itself. 3 winters counting coal, 3 summers mending cuffs, 3 years in which Hazelcombe's fields had yielded rents, while she had measured candle ends in a schoolroom and pretended that gratitude made dependence honourable. "Who has received the income since I turned 25? She asked. Sir Rupert answered before Lawrence could. "You speak as though identity has already been proved." Winifred turned toward him. "The deed carries my full name. A name is not a body." Lady Blanche folded her hands before her. "Surely we should avoid vulgar conclusions at dinner." "The vulgarity began before the soup," Lady Imogen said. "Imogen!" Lady Blanche snapped. Lawrence raised his gaze, and his aunt fell silent. He looked again at Winifred. "Do you wish the remaining terms read before those who heard the accusation?" The choice steadied her. He had not assumed privacy would protect her. He had asked. Winifred looked down the length of the table at the guests who had watched Sir Rupert reduce her to a dependent. Yes, she said, they may hear the same truth. Lawrence read the central provisions without embellishment. Hazelcombe had been settled Winifred's maternal grandfather for Ruth Hart Trescott's only surviving daughter. Sir Rupert had been appointed guardian after the deaths of Winifred's parents. During her minority, rents were to be held and applied for her education, maintenance, and the preservation of the estate. Upon her 25th birthday, possession and accrued beneficial interest were to pass to her. The words, "only surviving daughter," settled heavily over the room. Winifred touched the hornbook through the fabric of her pocket. Her mother's name appeared in the deed. Ruth Hart Trescott, the woman who had taught her letters, had not left her only a carved piece of wood. She had left a legal trail someone had hidden. "Why was I never told?" Winifred asked. Sir Rupert's expression hardened. "Because the woman named in that instrument did not live to inherit." Lady Imogen's chair creaked as she leaned forward. "She is sitting there." "You know nothing of the matter," Sir Rupert said. "I know her name." "You know the name she uses." The distinction chilled the room. Winifred's hand closed around the hornbook. "What are you saying?" Sir Rupert spoke with the controlled patience of a man correcting a child. "The true Winifred Trescott died of fever before reaching adolescence. The young woman now called Miss Trescott descends from a lesser branch and was taken into my care as a charitable duty." Winifred stared at him. "You told me you were my father's brother. I told you what was necessary to preserve your position. You signed yourself my uncle in letters to my employers. Courtesy is not genealogy." The words might have shaken another person into silence. Winifred felt something cleaner than fear. Anger stripped of confusion. "Then name the branch from which I supposedly descend." Sir Rupert's eyes narrowed. "This is neither the time nor place." "It became the place when you told a dining table I was no one." Lady Blanche reached for her wine. "Sir Rupert has explained the difficulty. The deed may be genuine while Miss Trescott's claim is mistaken." "He has asserted a difficulty," Lawrence said. "He has explained nothing." Sir Rupert inclined his head. "I can produce a published death notice." "Produce it." "I can also produce a witness from the school." Winifred felt the hornbook's worn edge beneath her fingers. "Which school?" Sir Rupert looked at her with a flicker of satisfaction, as though she had stepped where he intended. "The establishment where the true heiress died." "Name it." "You will have the name when the evidence is properly assembled." Lawrence folded the deed once along its existing crease, careful not to create another. "You will provide the notice and the witness. Until then, you will not call Miss Trescott a fraud, an impostor, or a usurper beneath my roof. Your Grace, caution must apply equally." "It does." Lawrence's gaze moved to Winifred. "The deed establishes that a woman named Winifred Ruth Trescott was given Hazelcombe. It does not, by itself, establish that every person using that name is the beneficiary. We will examine the identity question." The restraint in his words stung, but it did not humiliate her. He had not taken Sir Rupert's accusation as truth. Neither had he converted hope into certainty for the pleasure of rescuing her. "And, while you examine it," Winifred asked, "the deed remains secure. No one removes it from Larkstone tonight. Tomorrow I will send for Basil Crowther in York." Sir Rupert's mouth tightened. A Bramford solicitor cannot be considered neutral. He can preserve custody and identify what further proof is required. "You may instruct your own solicitor." Lady Blanche lifted her brows. "Must this become a public legal quarrel?" Winifred looked at her. It became public when I was mocked for knowing where Hazelcombe stood. Lady Blanche's face cooled, but no one laughed now. Lawrence slipped the deed back into its folio. Dinner is concluded. The announcement came before the second course. Chairs moved, guests rose, and servants opened the doors. Lady Blanche directed the ladies toward the drawing-room with brittle composure. Winifred remained beside her chair until Lady Imogen came to her. "You are Winifred Ruth," the girl whispered. Winifred drew the hornbook from her pocket and held it in both hands. "I know what my mother called me." "Isn't that enough?" Winifred looked toward Sir Rupert, who stood at the opposite end of the table, speaking in a low voice to Lawrence. For love, perhaps, not for land. In the drawing-room, Mrs. Pritchard took a chair near the open doors. Lawrence entered, carrying the closed folio. Sir Rupert followed. "You will have your proof," Sir Rupert said, a black-bordered notice bearing the name Winifred Trescott, a former clerk who remembers the fever, records if necessary. "Then bring all of it," Lawrence replied, "not fragments chosen for convenience." Something shifted in Sir Rupert's face at the word fragments, so quickly that Winifred might have imagined it. "You will find that the child named in the settlement was buried before this woman reached adolescence." He looked directly at Winifred. Whatever name she has carried since, it does not make her the dead girl restored. Lawrence placed himself between Sir Rupert and the door, not between Sir Rupert and Winifred. "Enough." Winifred tightened her grip on the hornbook. "No," she said. Both men looked at her. "Let him finish." Sir Rupert's expression sharpened. Winifred met it without lowering her eyes. "Tomorrow, bring the notice. Bring the witness. Bring every record you possess." Her voice remained steady. "Then explain which girl you buried before you decided I should disappear with her." Sir Rupert did not answer. Lawrence carried the Morocco folio to the private iron safe in his study, locked the original deed inside, and placed the key in his own keeping. Behind him, the house settled into an uneasy silence, while the woman named in the deed held the hornbook that had carried her name long before any duke read it aloud. By noon on the 17th of September, Winifred's name had acquired seals, witnesses, and the attention of a solicitor who looked as though he trusted paper more readily than people. Mr. Basil Crowther arrived from York in a dark travelling coat, accompanied by a junior clerk carrying a narrow black deed box and a leather case of writing materials. He was a spare man of 46, with iron grey at his temples and the habit of listening without interrupting, which distinguished him at once from nearly everyone who had spoken about Winifred since dinner. Lawrence received him in the morning room. Mrs. Pritchard sat near the open connecting door with her sewing. Winifred stood beside the long table. Lady Blanche had entered without invitation and placed herself near the fire, as though proximity to the inquiry might restore the authority she had lost the previous evening. Sir Rupert had not appeared. "The original remains where I secured it last night," Lawrence said. "In my private iron safe." Basil inclined his head. "Then we begin by recording its removal." Lawrence unlocked the safe in his study, while Basil's clerk noted the hour. The Morocco folio returned to the morning room in Lawrence's hands. The ribbon lay loose from the dinner, but the deed inside remained folded along its original creases. Basil washed and dried his hands before touching it. The simple care of the gesture affected Winifred more than ceremony would have done. Her life had been handled carelessly by people who called themselves guardians. This stranger treated even the paper bearing her name as something that must not be damaged. Basil examined the parchment beneath the window light. He checked the signatures, seals, dates, interlineations, and endorsement on the reverse. He read the beneficiary clause twice, then the guardian provisions. The instrument appears regular upon its face. He said. Lady Blanche released a quiet breath. Then Hazelcombe belongs to Miss Trescott. I did not say that, my lady. Basil's tone remained courteous. I said the deed appears genuine and properly executed. It establishes that Hazelcombe was settled upon a particular person named Winifred Ruth Trescott. We must still establish whether Miss Trescott is that person, which is precisely Sir Rupert's objection, Lady Blanche said. Winifred looked at the deed. An objection, he kept silent until the document appeared. Basil's eyes shifted toward her, registering the point. Yes. Lawrence stood at the end of the table, one hand resting against the chair back. What proof will be required? School records, guardian correspondence, family registers if they survive, evidence of continued maintenance, and the full context of any death notice Sir Rupert produces. Basil looked at Winifred. We should also record what Miss Trescott herself has known at each stage, not what she now suspects, what she actually knew. Winifred appreciated the distinction. Then ask me. Basil's clerk prepared a fresh sheet. Your full name? Winifred Ruth Trescott. Speaking it before witnesses no longer felt like defiance. It felt like laying the first stone of a road. Your age? 28. Your parents? My father was Captain Matthew Trescott. My mother was Ruth Hart Trescott. When did they die? My father died first. I was told he succumbed to illness after returning from service. My mother lived for several months after I entered school. Then I was informed she had died. Who informed you? Sir Rupert. Basil paused. Where were you educated? At St. Aldwyn's Seminary for young ladies outside Thirsk. Lady Blanche turned sharply. You did not mention that last night. Sir Rupert refused to name the school. Winifred kept her eyes on Basil. At St. Aldwyn's, I was enrolled as Winifred Ruth Hart. Lawrence's expression changed. Hart, my mother's maiden name. Did you know why it was used? I was told Trescott was unsuitable because my circumstances were uncertain. At 8, I understood uncertainty to be a failing in myself. Mrs. Pritchard's needle stopped. Winifred continued before sympathy could interrupt. At 18, Sir Rupert permitted me to use Trescott in professional references. He said, Hart sounded too common for a governess seeking employment in a gentleman's household. Did he ever call you his niece? Basil asked. In private, when it served him. In letters to employers, he described me as a distant relation under his protection. Did he discuss Hazelcombe? Never clearly. He said it belonged to another branch. Did he name that branch? No. Basil's clerk wrote steadily. Lady Blanche folded her arms. This may prove only that Sir Rupert supported a poor relation. It may, Basil replied. That is why we collect evidence before deciding what it proves. He drew 3 blank sheets toward him. Miss Trescott, what inquiries do you believe should be made first? Lady Blanche looked offended that the solicitor would ask her. Winifred did not hesitate. She had spent the night arranging the questions because facts seemed less frightening when placed in order. First, where was the beneficiary educated, and under what name? Basil nodded. Second, who paid for that education, and for how long? Third, whose death does Sir Rupert's notice actually record? The clerk's pen moved across the page. Basil looked up. Those are the correct questions. The approval warmed nothing in Winifred. It steadied her instead. Lawrence crossed to a side table and opened a small cash box. Until this is resolved, You may require funds for travel, clothing, or independent advice. Winifred met his gaze. No. Lady Blanche gave a faint sound of disbelief. Lawrence closed the lid without offence. You need not answer immediately. I am answering now. Winifred rested one hand on the table. If I accept money from you before my identity is established, Sir Rupert will say, poverty made me eager to become the woman in the deed. He may say it regardless. Then I will not provide him with the fact. Basil gave the smallest nod. Lawrence studied her for a moment, then returned the key to his pocket. Very well. I will accept necessary travel arranged as part of the inquiry, Winifred added. Not a personal allowance, agreed. Basil finished his examination and folded the deed along its existing lines. He placed it in blue paper, tied the wrapper with white tape, and lowered it into the black deed box his clerk had brought. Lawrence and Basil pressed their seals into wax across the fastening. The clerk recorded the seal impressions and box number. Basil then prepared a custody memorandum. The original will travel with me to York this afternoon, he said. My clerk will remain with the box throughout the journey. Upon arrival, we will enter it in the Chamber's custody book and lock it in the secure inner office. Winifred read the memorandum before signing. Her hand trembled only once, at the first letter of Ruth. She completed the name carefully. Winifred Ruth Trescott. Basil sanded the ink, then handed her a receipt. A certified copy will be prepared and delivered to you. Keep this receipt separately. Winifred folded it into her document case. The original deed now belonged to no one's pocket or private memory. Its movement had witnesses. Lady Blanche approached the table. And where is Miss Trescott to remain while this inquiry proceeds? Surely not among the family, as though her claim were already proved. Lawrence's voice cooled. Miss Trescott will remain at Larkstone as a guest under my protection while her claim is examined. She is employed here. Not at your pleasure. You cannot expect household order to survive if a governess becomes a guest overnight. Winifred turned toward her. I have not become anything overnight. The document was written 7 years ago. Lady Blanche's lips tightened. Lawrence continued. You will not dismiss Miss Trescott, search her room, intercept her correspondence, or issue any instruction concerning her movements without my authority. You speak as though I were accused. I am preventing further injury while the accusation is examined. Lady Blanche looked from him to Winifred and understood that rank had changed the room, though not in the manner she preferred. And Lady Imogen's lessons? She asked. Winifred answered before Lawrence could. I will give her one final lesson on the morning of the 20th. She should not lose a teacher without explanation, because adults have chosen scandal. Lawrence's eyes rested on her with quiet respect. That will be her last duty as governess, unless Miss Trescott later chooses otherwise. By 3 o'clock, Basil and his clerk departed Larkstone. Winifred stood beneath the portico with Lawrence and watched the black deed box carried into the carriage beneath the clerk's direct supervision. Basil placed it on the forward seat between himself and the locked door. I will send confirmation upon arrival, he said. The carriage rolled toward the drive and disappeared beyond the beech trees. Several hours later, a messenger returned from York with Basil's signed notice. The sealed box had arrived intact and had been entered into custody at his chambers. Beneath that confirmation lay a second message from St. Aldwyn's. The admission volume for October 1833 still survived. Winifred read the line twice. Somewhere outside Thirsk, an old school book still held the name given to the 8-year-old child, Sir Rupert had tried to separate from the woman she became. The road to St. Aldwyn's turned east beyond Thirsk and narrowed between low stone walls darkened by the previous night's rain. Winifred sat beside Mrs. Pritchard in Lawrence's closed carriage, while Basil Crowther occupied the opposite seat with a leather portfolio on his knees. Lawrence sat beside him, one gloved hand resting near the window strap. The original settlement deed remained sealed in Basil's secure York chambers, exactly where the custody receipt said it should be. Only letters of introduction, blank certification forms, and Winifred's written questions travelled with them. For most of the journey, no one spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It felt watchful. Fields passed in long green bands beneath a pale September sky. Sheep clustered near hedges. A church tower rose, disappeared, and rose again between trees. Winifred kept her hands folded over the wooden horn book in her pocket. She had not slept well. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the line in the deed, naming her mother and Sir Rupert's face as he claimed the living woman at the table belonged to another branch. "You needn't answer anything today unless you choose," Lawrence said at last. Winifred looked toward him. "The records may answer more than I can. That doesn't mean they're entitled to your memories." Basil glanced up from his portfolio but said nothing. Winifred appreciated the distinction. "There is one memory I cannot stop examining," she said. "The school window." Mrs. Pritchard turned slightly toward her. Winifred kept her eyes on the passing road. "I was 8 when Sir Rupert left me at St. Aldwyn's. For weeks, I waited at the landing window whenever the post came. My mother had promised to write. The first 2 letters arrived, then none did." Lawrence's expression sharpened. "You were told she had died soon afterward, several months afterward." Winifred touched the hornbook through her skirt. "I believed silence had begun before death. I thought perhaps she was too ill or disappointed, or had changed her mind about bringing me home." "An 8-year-old would think the fault was hers," Mrs. Pritchard said softly. "An 8-year-old can make herself responsible for almost anything." Winifred looked out as the carriage crossed a narrow stone bridge. "If the school kept instructions about correspondence, I want to see them." Lawrence did not offer comfort she had not requested. "Then we will." St. Aldwyn's Seminary for Young Ladies stood outside Thirsk, behind a wall of pale brick and iron railings. The main building was square and practical, with yellow brick wings extending toward a kitchen garden and a gravel yard. Nothing about it had changed enough to make Winifred doubt her memory. The central steps remained too steep. The chapel windows still caught light unevenly. A cedar tree beside the eastern wing had grown thick enough to shade the upper rooms. But the landing window was visible between its branches. Winifred stopped before entering. Lawrence came to stand near her, not close enough to crowd. "Is that the window?" he asked. "Yes," he followed her gaze. "Then let us find out why no letters reached it." Mr. Fenlow, one of the current trustees, received them in a plain office smelling of dust, sealing wax, and old paper. He was a careful man with silver spectacles and an apologetic habit of pressing his lips together before difficult facts. "The institution has changed trustees twice," he explained, "but we retained the earlier admission volumes and correspondence bundles because several former pupils required proof of age or parentage. Basil presented his authority to inspect records relevant to a disputed trust. Mr. Fenlow read it, then looked at Winifred. "You attended under the name Hart, Winifred Ruth Hart, and you believe the entry may connect you to Ruth Hart Trescott?" I believe the entry should say what the school was told. The answer seemed to satisfy him. He led them into a narrow archive room where shelves rose to the ceiling. Mrs. Pritchard remained beside Winifred. Lawrence and Basil stood opposite the long table, while Mr. Fenlow brought down a bound admission book from 1833. He set it on a felt pad and turned the pages himself. Names passed beneath his finger in brown ink, each girl reduced to age, parentage, fees, and conduct. Winifred felt an unexpected anger at the orderliness of it. Her childhood had been entered here, while her understanding of it had been deliberately kept untidy. Mr. Fenlow stopped. October 1833. Winifred leaned closer. The entry read, Winifred Ruth Hart, aged 8 years, mother, Mrs. Ruth Hart Trescott. Guardian correspondence to Sir Rupert Trescott, Baronet. For several seconds, she heard nothing beyond the faint scrape of a branch against the outer wall. Her mother's full married name stood beside hers. Sir Rupert's title followed beneath it. Not distant relation, not charitable patron, guardian. May I read the entire entry? Winifred asked. Of course. Mr. Fenlow moved aside without touching the volume again. Winifred read every line twice. The ink did not tremble. It had waited 20 years with more consistency than the man who signed the instructions. Basil pointed to a notation in the margin, correspondence restrictions. Is the accompanying letter preserved? Mr. Fenlow consulted a reference mark, then opened a flat storage box. Inside lay folded letters tied in faded tape. He located one bearing Sir Rupert's hand. The letter instructed the school to use Hart in public lists and to route all personal correspondence through the Guardian's London agent. No letter from any other member of the Trescott family was to be delivered without Sir Rupert's prior approval. Discussion of the girl's paternal connections was described as harmful to her character and future expectations. Winifred did not move. The landing window seemed suddenly present in the room, its cold glass beneath her child's fingers. He stopped them, she said. Basil's voice remained low. He ordered the school to stop them. There may have been letters. There may have been. Lawrence's jaw tightened. Can the school determine whether any were received and withheld? Mr. Fenlow looked stricken. The incoming post ledgers from that quarter do not survive. We may only certify the instruction. Winifred placed both palms lightly against the edge of the table. She had imagined neglect, because neglect was easier to understand than deliberate silence. My mother may have written after all. No one contradicted her. No one promised what the records could not prove. Mr. Fenlow prepared the admission volume for certified copying and separated the Guardian instruction for the same purpose. The originals remained on the table under his supervision. Basil then asked for the tuition register. A second volume was brought down. The first payment appeared shortly after admission in 1833. The name varied over the years. Winifred Hart, Miss Hart, the Hart ward. The payer remained consistent. Funds arrived through Jonas Preece, agent to Sir Rupert Trescott. Basil turned the pages slowly, calling out only the years. 1833, 1834, 1835. Winifred watched his finger move beyond the year. Sir Rupert claimed the true Winifred had died. 1836, 1837. The payments continued. 1838, 1839, 1840, 1841, 1842, 1843. Then they stopped. 10 years in all, Basil said, and 8 years after the death, Sir Rupert says removed the beneficiary. Lawrence looked at Winifred, but she was still staring at the register. He paid to keep me here, she said. Not abandoned, maintained. Maintained under another surname, Basil replied. And without free correspondence. The distinction cut more deeply than poverty ever had. Sir Rupert had not forgotten where she was. He had known precisely. Mr. Fenlow agreed to certify the relevant tuition entries and the guardian instruction. While his clerk prepared copies, Winifred stepped into the corridor for air. The staircase descended beneath a tall window. When she placed one hand on the rail, the wood shifted under her palm. Lawrence moved beside her, but did not touch her. He offered his arm. "May I?" Winifred looked at him. The question was small, but the day had taught her how much harm could hide inside choices taken away. Yes, she rested her hand lightly on his sleeve. His arm steadied without tightening. They descended one step at a time. "You said last night that caution must apply equally," she said. "I did." "Does it?" Lawrence was silent until they reached the landing. "Not always. Men with position can call delay prudence. Those without it live inside the consequences." Winifred studied his face. "You speak as though you learned that painfully." A shadow passed through his expression. "I contradicted men in my own political circle before they were prepared to be contradicted. They shortened my words in print until my argument became arrogance, and the truth became indiscretion. Were you wrong? No, then perhaps the timing was not the part they feared." Lawrence looked toward the archive door. Perhaps not. Winifred's hand remained on his arm a moment longer than the stairs required. Then she withdrew. "Do not let caution become another silence," she said. "I won't." Behind them, Basil emerged carrying the certified copies in his portfolio. The original admission book, the original tuition register, and Sir Rupert's original instruction remained in St. Aldwyn's archive. Winifred carried nothing from the school except copies, questions, and the certainty that Sir Rupert had continued paying for her education for 8 years after the death he intended others to believe was hers. The first certified receipt called her the Heart Ward, as though she had been neither child nor relation, but an expense to be entered beneath someone else's control. On the morning of the 19th of September, Basil Crowther placed 3 documents in a careful line across the small estate office table at Larkstone. The original school records remained at St. Aldwyn's. These were certified copies bearing the school seal and Mr. Fenlow's signature. Lawrence stood near the window with the household steward. Mrs. Pritchard occupied a chair beside the open door. Winifred sat opposite Basil with a blank sheet before her and the hornbook resting unseen in her pocket. "I have selected only the entries that establish the pattern," Basil said. "The first payment, the instruction issued when you reached 18, and the final payment before you left the school's supervision." He touched the earliest copy. October 1833. Payment received through Mr. Jonas Preece, London agent to Sir Rupert Trescott for the maintenance and tuition of the Heart Ward. Winifred read the words herself. No father's name appeared. No Hazelcombe. No acknowledgement that Ruth Hart Trescott's daughter was anything more than a burden efficiently managed. Basil moved to the second document. "This was sent when you were 18. The instruction permitted the school to use Trescott in professional references because the surname might assist her employment in a respectable household. It expressly discouraged discussion of close kinship, property expectations, or the principal Trescott line. "I remember the first reference," Winifred said. "The vicar's wife at Belcross read it while I stood in the passage." Lady Blanche would have considered the detail beneath notice. Lawrence did not. "What did it say?" he asked. Winifred looked again at the certified instruction. Quiet habits, no troublesome connections, sufficient French, modest expectations. The words returned with humiliating clarity. She had once been grateful for them. It gave an employer enough assurance of gentle birth to admit me into the schoolroom, but not enough information to ask why I had no family. Basil nodded. A carefully limited respectability. A saleable one, Winifred said. Not high enough to create questions, not low enough to make employment difficult. Lawrence's gaze sharpened. You saw that from one reference. A governess learns to hear what families avoid saying. We are hired because our origins matter, then expected to behave as though they do not. She looked down at the final payment copy. The name there was Miss Hart. The payer remained Jonas Preece, 10 years of education, each year tied to Sir Rupert's office. I want to prepare the chronology myself, she said. Basil had already reached for his pen. He stopped. Certainly. You may put it into legal form afterward. The sequence should first be written by the person who lived through it. Lawrence drew a pen stand closer to her without speaking. The gesture was small, but unlike so many kindnesses offered to dependent women, it did not require her to surrender the task in return. Winifred began. October 1833, admitted as Winifred Ruth Hart. Guardian, Sir Rupert Trescott. Mother, Ruth Hart Trescott. Correspondence restricted. Payments through Jonas Preece, 1843, permitted to use Trescott for employment while parentage remained obscured. She left space beside each entry for evidence still required. There was no formal departure from the school. Basil asked. I remained long enough to qualify for employment. My first position began soon afterward, and Sir Rupert arranged it. His agent sent the reference. The steward, who had been comparing names against an estate directory, looked up. Mr. Jonas Preece also appears in older Hazelcombe rent correspondence. The room became still. How old? Basil asked. The entries begin before Miss Trescott left school and continue afterward. He acted for Sir Rupert in receiving rents and issuing repairs. Winifred set down the pen. The same office had paid to keep Winifred Hart in a seminary and collected the income of the supposedly dead Winifred Trescott. Lawrence crossed to the steward's side and examined the directory. Do not infer more than the records show, he said, though his voice had tightened, but secure copies of every Hazelcombe account bearing Preece's name at once, Your Grace. A footman entered with a note delivered from Thirsk. Basil broke the seal. Mr. Fenlow has identified the former clerk Sir Rupert may intend to produce, Mrs. Agnes Noakes. She now lives outside Easingwold. Was she employed at St. Aldwyn's when the girl died? Winifred asked. Basil read the final lines. The employment dates are not yet confirmed. The trustees are searching the payroll books. A second folded paper had arrived with it, bearing Sir Rupert's hand. Basil passed it to Lawrence, who read aloud. Mrs. Noakes remembers the death clearly and is prepared to swear an affidavit establishing that the Trescott heiress and the Hart pupil were separate children. Winifred looked at the chronology she had begun. Sir Rupert had moved quickly because the school records threatened the story he had controlled for 20 years. He does not merely expect us to find evidence, she said. He intends to provide the memory we are meant to accept before the records can contradict it. Lawrence folded the note. Then we obtain the records first. And Hazelcombe? Winifred asked. We go this afternoon, Basil said. Its tenants may tell us how the owner's death was represented. The journey from Larkstone took a little more than an hour. Mrs. Pritchard sat beside Winifred in the carriage, with Basil opposite. Lawrence rode for the first miles, then joined them when the road narrowed beneath neglected lime trees. Hazelcombe appeared beyond a low stone wall, square and restrained, with shuttered upper windows and ivy climbing one chimney. The house did not look ruined. It looked maintained only enough to continue earning money. No flower beds softened the approach. A wagon stood beside the stable yard, and 2 tenant farmers waited beneath the covered entrance with the interim steward. Lawrence descended first, but did not announce Winifred as a supplicant. "This is Miss Trescott," he said. "She has come to hear how Hazelcombe was administered." The older tenant removed his hat. "Mr. Dawes, Miss." His eyes moved briefly over her plain travelling dress, then back to her face. "We were told the young owner died years ago." "Who told you?" Winifred asked. "Sir Rupert's agent, Mr. Priest's office sent the notices." Said Sir Rupert represented the surviving Trescott interest. "Did the notice name the dead owner?" "Only Miss Trescott, as I recall." "Mr. Dawes glanced toward the other farmer, who nodded. "We paid rents to the same office every Michaelmas." Basil asked the practical questions. Dates, receipts, repairs, instructions. The steward recorded each answer. Winifred did not attempt to follow every sum. She listened instead for the language. Dead owner, surviving interest, distant relation. The phrases matched the ones used to describe her employment. Sir Rupert had not created separate lives for school and estate. He had built one story broad enough to govern both. "Did anyone ever ask whether the owner had left another name?" Winifred asked. Mr. Dawes looked troubled. "We had no cause, miss. A baronet's agent sent the papers." There was no insolence in the answer. Only the obedience rank had purchased. "You paid the person presented as lawful," she said. "No blame rests with you." Relief crossed his weathered face. Lawrence watched her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not pity, recognition, perhaps, of how easily she could have used the tenant's confusion to make herself feel powerful. She had chosen accuracy instead. On the return journey, Mrs. Pritchard dozed lightly against the carriage corner. Basil reviewed notes. Lawrence sat opposite Winifred, one hand braced against the movement of the wheels. "You heard more in their words than I did," he said. "You were listening for money, and you for identity." Their eyes held for a moment. "Sir Rupert used the same method everywhere," she continued. "He reduced each description until only the useful part remained. At school, I was a ward without parentage. In employment, a gentlewoman without connections. At Hazelcombe, an owner without a living name." Lawrence's expression darkened. "Then the death notice may be cut in the same fashion." "That is what I fear." When the carriage reached Larkstone, Lady Blanche waited beneath the portico with a stack of cream invitations in her hand. Servants were already carrying folded marquees toward the west lawn. "You have returned at last," she said. "The harvest fete will proceed the day after tomorrow." Lawrence stepped down. "I gave no approval. The invitations have already gone. County families, neighbouring landowners, and several Hazelcombe tenants have accepted." Her gaze moved to Winifred. "Sir Rupert will attend. So will Mrs. Noakes. He believes it best that this misunderstanding be resolved before respectable witnesses." Winifred felt the chronology inside Basil's portfolio and the hornbook against her side. Lady Blanche smiled with perfect social calm. "He will bring the death notice." The front doors opened behind her. Beyond the hall, preparations had already begun for the gathering where Sir Rupert intended to prove that Winifred Ruth Trescott had died. Lady Imogen misspelled her own name only once during the final lesson, and this time she did not reach for the page. On the morning of the 20th of September, the schoolroom windows stood open to the muted sounds of servants raising the last marquee poles on the west lawn. Hammer blows carried across the grass at measured intervals. Inside, the fire had not been lit, though the air held the first coolness of autumn. Winifred stood beside the writing desk, while Imogen copied a passage from a history of the Plantagenets. The girl paused over the second M, corrected it, and looked up. "You said this is my last lesson." "For now. That means forever when adults say it." Winifred set down the grammar book. Sometimes adults use vague words because they are afraid of exact ones. Then be exact. The demand might have sounded impertinent from another child. From Imogen, it sounded wounded. Winifred crossed to the window, then stopped before she could use the preparations outside as an excuse to turn away. "I cannot promise that I will remain your governess after the inquiry." Imogen's mouth tightened. "Because you might become rich?" "No." "Because you might become important?" "No." Winifred returned to the desk. "Because whether Hazelcombe is mine or not, too much has changed for me to continue as though nothing happened at dinner." Imogen looked down at the copybook. "You are still Miss Trescott?" "Yes, and you are still Winifred Ruth." Winifred felt the hornbook in her pocket. "I know that is the name my mother gave me. The records may now show what other people did with it." "Then, why does Sir Rupert get to say you are someone else?" "He gets to say it because he is willing to say it. That does not make it true." "Will I have to speak tomorrow?" "No." Imogen's head rose quickly. "But I heard him. I know what he said." "You are not evidence. I could tell everyone how you teach me. That would tell them what sort of governess I am. It would not prove who entered St. Aldwyn's at 8 years old." Winifred took the girl's hand and turned it palm upward. A faint ink stain marked the side of one finger. "You are not a shield to be placed between adults when they behave badly. You are 13. Your task is to learn, ask questions, and grow into a woman who does not confuse affection with proof." Imogen blinked hard. "I hate when you are sensible." "So do I, on occasion." A reluctant smile touched the girl's mouth. Winifred drew the hornbook from her pocket and placed it between them. The carved words remained faint but legible. "For my Winifred Ruth. My mother used this to teach me that names deserve care," Winifred said. "Not because a name makes a person noble, but because carelessness lets the wrong person be forgotten." Imogen traced the worn edge without touching the inscription. "Will you take it with you tomorrow?" "Yes. So you will remember who you are." Winifred closed her fingers around the wood. "So I will remember that someone knew before the records did." The girl looked at her for a long moment, then returned to the copybook. She finished the passage without another mistake. When the lesson ended, she stood abruptly and embraced Winifred before either of them could discuss whether such affections was proper between pupil and governess. Winifred held her only briefly. "You must not ask to come with me if I leave Larkstone," she said. Imogen pulled back. "How did you know I would?" "Because I have taught you for 4 years. I still might ask, and I will still say no." "That seems unfair." "It is." Winifred gathered the books. "Fairness does not always mean getting what love makes us want." Mrs. Pritchard appeared at the open door. "His Grace is waiting in the small library, miss." Imogen turned away to arrange her pens, though they were already straight. Winifred paused beside her. "Write to me with your full name," she said. "I will answer with mine." The small library smelled of leather, beeswax, and damp earth carried in from the terrace. Lawrence stood near the long table where Basil had left certified copies of the St. Aldwyn's admission entry and guardian instructions. The original school records remained at the seminary. The original deed remained sealed in Basil's black box at York Chambers. Mrs. Pritchard took her place in the adjoining morning room, where the connecting doors stood open. Outside, a footman carried folded lengths of cream canvas toward the lawn. Lawrence watched him pass before facing Winifred. The fete can still be cancelled. No, Lady Blanche had no authority to send those invitations. She has sent them. I can recall them. And she will tell everyone the governess claiming Hazelcombe begged a duke to hide her. Lawrence's jaw tightened. You are not obliged to submit yourself to ridicule in order to prove courage. I am not doing it for courage. Winifred placed the hornbook on the table beside the certified school entry. Sir Rupert chose a public audience because he believes status will make his version of events feel more credible. If the gathering is cancelled, he will carry the story elsewhere without the records. Beside it, the records are not yet complete. Neither is his notice. That may not matter to those who want a simple conclusion. Then, I would rather see who chooses simplicity when the missing pieces are visible. Lawrence came around the table, but stopped before entering her reach. What do you want from me tomorrow? The question was more important than any promise made without it. Winifred looked at him steadily. Do not let Sir Rupert call me a fraud before the evidence is examined. He will not. Do not answer questions directed to me. I will not. Do not send me indoors, remove me from the lawn, or call silence protection. His expression changed at the final phrase, I will not. And when the gathering becomes uncomfortable, it will. When Lady Blanche provokes the guests, when Sir Rupert produces a witness, when the magistrate advises caution. Lawrence drew a slow breath. I will stand beside you. Beside me, Winifred repeated. Or before me? Beside. She studied his face, searching not for certainty but for understanding. You may discover that standing beside a woman does not give you control over what she says. I know. Do you? A faint shadow crossed his eyes. Not as well as I should. The admission carried more weight than confidence would have done. Winifred turned the hornbook over. My mother believed a name should be written exactly. She said one careless letter could send a message to the wrong person. Lawrence read the inscription without touching it. Sir Rupert has done more than misspell you. Yes, he reduced you. At school, I was a ward without family. In employment, a gentlewoman without expectations. At Hazelcombe, an owner without a living name. Lawrence looked toward the certified admission extract. Men did something similar to my speeches. Winifred waited. I spoke against members of my own political circle. He continued. The reports removed the evidence and kept the accusation. By the time the papers finished with me, prudence had become cowardice in one column and recklessness in another. Were your facts wrong? No. Then they feared the meaning. They feared the consequences of admitting it. He rested one hand on the table, palm upward, leaving the space between them untouched. Since then, I have tried to secure every fact before speaking. Winifred looked at his open hand. Caution becomes cruelty when only the powerless are required to wait. The sentence settled between them. Lawrence did not argue. Then remember this, he said. Tomorrow I will not make your silence the price of my caution. Winifred placed her hand in his. His fingers closed slowly, neither possessive nor tentative. The warmth moved through her palm with quiet force. He did not draw her nearer. He did not speak as though contact had granted him anything beyond the moment. They stood with the hornbook and school record between them, her hand held in his, while the workmen outside drove the last tent pegs into the lawn. I am afraid of repeating the mistake that ruined my political standing, Lawrence said. I know. I am more afraid that fear will make me repeat Sir Rupert's methods. Winifred's fingers tightened once. Then do not decide for me when the moment comes. I will not. Footsteps approached in the corridor. They released each other before Mrs. Pritchard appeared in the connecting doorway, her expression composed but alert. Your Grace, Sir Rupert's carriage has entered the North Drive. Lawrence straightened. Winifred returned the hornbook to her pocket. A second carriage followed the first, its wheels grinding over the gravel. Through the library window, they saw Sir Rupert descend beneath the portico. Behind him came a narrow woman in black, clutching a leather reticule against her ribs. Sir Rupert carried a folded newspaper clipping inside a dark leather folder. Even at a distance, the border of mourning ink was visible. Mrs. Pritchard lowered her voice. The lady has given her name as Mrs. Agnes Noakes. Winifred looked at Lawrence. Tomorrow's accusation had arrived a day early. He did not step in front of her. He came to stand at her side. By 11 o'clock on the 21st of September, Larkstone's west lawn had been transformed into a polite arena. Cream marquees stood between the terrace and the beach walk. Long tables carried harvest loaves, pies, preserves, and silver urns of tea. Tenant families gathered nearer the lower lawn, while county neighbours moved beneath the awnings in dark coats and autumn silks, speaking in voices carefully lowered whenever Winifred passed. She wore a plain dark blue gown, altered by Mrs. Pritchard from one stored at Larkstone. It fit well enough to deny Lady Blanche the pleasure of calling her shabby, but no borrowed elegance disguised what most of the guests still believed her to be. A governess claiming land, a dependent claiming a name. Winifred kept the hornbook in her pocket. Basil held the certified copies from St. Aldwyn's in a narrow evidence portfolio. The original school records remained in the seminary archive. The original deed remained sealed in Basil's black box at his York chambers. Nothing central to her claim had been brought onto the lawn except copies and memory. Lawrence stayed close without placing himself between Winifred and those who watched her. He had kept that part of his promise. Yet she could see the tension in him each time another carriage arrived. Mr. Halford, a local magistrate, appeared shortly before noon. His presence had not been discussed with her. When Lawrence introduced him, Winifred understood that caution had already begun arranging the afternoon. Sir Rupert came last, accompanied by his solicitor and Mrs. Noakes. The woman wore the same narrow black dress Winifred had seen from the library window and carried a leather reticule clutched tightly in both hands. Sir Rupert held a dark folder beneath his arm. Lady Blanche rang a small silver handbell before the first tea was poured. Conversation thinned into silence. "My friends," she began, "you have all heard distressing reports concerning Hazelcombe. His Grace has permitted the relevant facts to be heard, so that confusion may be resolved before respectable names suffer further injury." Lawrence's expression hardened. He had permitted no speech. Lady Blanche continued before he could stop her. "Miss Trescott, formerly governess to Lady Imogen, believes herself connected to the estate. Sir Rupert Trescott has come to prevent a misunderstanding from hardening into fraud." Winifred stepped forward. "You might have begun by using my name without attaching an accusation to it." A few heads turned toward Lady Blanche. She smiled. You see how deeply she feels the matter. Feeling is not evidence, Winifred said, nor is condescension. Sir Rupert opened the dark folder. Then, let us speak of evidence. He withdrew a narrow newspaper clipping bordered in mourning ink. This notice records the death of the child named in the Hazelcombe settlement. He handed it to Mr. Halford, who read it silently before passing it to Basil. Winifred watched Basil's face remain neutral. "May I see it?" she asked. Sir Rupert glanced toward Lawrence, as though expecting the Duke to take control of the request. Lawrence did not. Basil carried the clipping directly to Winifred. The printed line was brief. Winifred Trescott. Aged 10 years, departed this life after a fever. The words ended abruptly. The upper margin had been cut close. The lower edge stopped immediately after the period. No middle name appeared, no father, no place, no second sentence, no printer's reference. Winifred turned the clipping over. The paper was blank. "This is not a complete notice," she said. Sir Rupert gave a weary sigh. "It contains the relevant statement. It contains one sentence. It contains the dead child's name. Part of her name, perhaps." Winifred lifted the clipping slightly toward the light. The text has been cut immediately after the first sentence. A family notice was preserved for its essential fact. Then why remove everything that identified the family? Murmurs moved beneath the marquee. Sir Rupert's mouth tightened. "You are inventing importance because the evidence does not suit you." "I am observing, Scissors." Basil stepped closer. "Do you possess the full issue?" "No." "A copied transcript?" "No." "The name of the newspaper?" Sir Rupert hesitated. "The paper was kept among old family records. The source may no longer be traceable." "Then the fragment proves only that a child named Winifred Trescott died aged 10, Basil said. "Nothing here identifies her parentage, branch, residence, or school." Sir Rupert turned toward Mrs. Noakes. "Fortunately, there is living testimony." His solicitor unfolded an affidavit. Mrs. Noakes stepped forward, her shoulders drawn tightly beneath her black shawl. "I served at St. Aldwyn's," she said. "I remember a Trescott child falling ill. She died before completing her education. The other girl, called Winifred Hart, was no relation to the principal Trescott family." Winifred studied her face. Nothing in it stirred recognition. "Which dormitory did I occupy?" Mrs. Noakes blinked. "I beg your pardon. You claim to distinguish two girls. Which dormitory did Winifred Hart occupy?" "There were several. Who was the matron? I do not recall. What color was the Hart girl's hair?" "Brown, I believe." "And the Trescott child's?" "Fair." "What year did the death occur?" Mrs. Noakes tightened her grip on the reticule. "It was many years ago. Yet your affidavit is exact enough to deny my identity." Sir Rupert intervened. "This interrogation proves nothing except desperation. It proves her memory has no date, no room, no matron, and no face," Winifred replied. The solicitor raised the affidavit. "Mrs. Noakes has sworn that the true heiress died at St. Aldwyn's, and that Miss Hart survived as a separate pupil." Basil's voice remained calm. "Her employment dates are being checked." Sir Rupert looked toward the guests. "Meanwhile, a deed cannot be handed to any woman who shares a convenient name. No one has proposed handing over the estate this afternoon," Lawrence said. His voice cut through the growing murmurs. "Nor will anyone call Miss Trescott fraudulent under my roof." Mr. Halford approached him, speaking quietly, but not so quietly that those nearest could not hear. "Your Grace, this gathering is not a court, and I cannot determine title. Still, it would be prudent for Larkstone and Hazelcombe agents to alter nothing for 48 hours. No transfer of possession, no movement of current rents, No new recognition of administrative control until the school dates and the full newspaper notice are examined. Winifred looked at Lawrence. He should have looked at her. Instead, he looked at the magistrate, the guests, the incomplete clipping, and perhaps at another public room where caution had once failed him. The choice passed across his face before he made it. For 48 hours, Lawrence announced, no change will be made to Hazelcombe's present administration while the records are completed. The words were measured, reasonable, devastating. He had not called her false. He had not ordered her away. He had kept Sir Rupert from turning the fate into an arrest or expulsion. Yet the guests heard something simpler. The Duke doubted her. The social pressure shifted at once. Faces that had been uncertain relaxed into judgment. Lady Blanche lowered her eyes with quiet satisfaction. Sir Rupert did not smile, but triumph entered his stillness. Winifred turned toward Lawrence. You decided that without asking me. His expression changed. Winifred Miss Trescott. Lady Blanche murmured. Lawrence ignored her. The hold prevents Sir Rupert from forcing any immediate step while the evidence is incomplete. And what does it prevent me from doing? Nothing essential. The answer wounded more because he believed it. Winifred held his gaze. My name is essential. I have not suspended your name. You have told every person here that the lie remains strong enough to govern the truth for 2 more days. I am preserving the position until we know more. Whose position? Silence spread outward from them. Lawrence took 1 step closer and stopped when Winifred did not move. I am trying to keep you safe. You have kept me from being removed. I understand that. Her voice remained steady. You have also made the decision I asked you not to make. Behind her, the clipped notice rustled faintly in Basil's hand. 1 sentence survived because Sir Rupert had chosen it. Now 1 announcement would survive because Lawrence had chosen it. You promised to stand beside me, Winifred said. I am beside you. No, you stood before me and decided which risk I was allowed to bear. The color left his face. Winifred did not look away. Why? She asked. Was your fear allowed to speak before I was? The guests had not yet left the west lawn. When Winifred entered the small library and closed both hands around the back of a chair to keep them steady. Through the open windows came the fading sounds of carriage wheels, silver cups being gathered, and voices lowered into the confidential tone people used when they wished to carry scandal home without appearing eager. Mrs. Pritchard remained in the adjoining morning room with the connecting doors open. Lawrence followed Winifred inside and stopped several paces away. He did not attempt to close the distance. The restraint came too late to prevent the wound, but not too late to show that he understood one had been made. I should have asked you before I agreed to the hold, he said. Winifred looked at him. Yes, he seemed almost more shaken by the simplicity of the answer than he would have been by anger. Mr. Halford was trying to prevent Sir Rupert from forcing the matter into formal proceedings before we had the full notice, or Mrs. Noakes's employment dates. And you believed an administrative pause would protect me. It keeps Hazelcombe unchanged for 48 hours. No rent moves, no possession changes. Sir Rupert cannot use the gathering to demand your removal or accuse you formally before the records are complete. You still decided which risk I was permitted to bear. I was trying to stop the greater harm. To whom? Lawrence's jaw tightened. To you. Winifred released the chair and stood upright. You still believe danger belongs to you to measure. I believed the crowd was turning. It was, sir. Rupert wanted a public declaration that you had no standing. And you gave him a public declaration that my claim was too uncertain to disturb the present order. That is not what I said. It is what they heard. Outside, a servant struck the last tent peg loose from the lawn. The canvas gave a soft, collapsing sigh. You promised not to decide for me when the moment came, Winifred said. Lawrence lowered his gaze. I broke that promise, yes. He looked at her again. I will not defend it as anything else. The admission reached her, but it did not repair the damage. You also failed to say that the clipping had been cut after its first sentence. You did not say. Mrs. Noakes could not name a dormitory, a matron, or a year. You placed their incomplete evidence beside my life and called both uncertain. I should have said more. You should have asked first. Yes. Winifred turned toward the writing desk. A sheet of paper lay beneath the blotter, where she had begun a formal resignation before the fate. She drew it out and finished the final line in a steady hand. I will leave Larkstone tomorrow morning. Lawrence went still. No. The word came from fear, not command, but Winifred heard both. She placed the pen down. That is not your decision either. Winifred, York is several hours away. You have no settled arrangement. I do. Mrs. Keene has rooms in York and has received me before. I sent a message after Sir Rupert arrived with Mrs. Noakes. You arranged this before the fate? I prepared for the possibility that everyone here might fail me. The words struck him cleanly. He accepted them without protest. Stay tonight, he said. Leave in daylight. Let me provide a carriage. I will stay until morning because the roads are safer then. I will not use your carriage. This is not charity. No, it is another action you would choose because you believe it wiser than mine. He closed his eyes briefly. What may I do? The question changed the room. It did not excuse him. It did show that he had finally learned where repair must begin. Winifred folded the resignation. Preserve every document. Issue no statement in my name without my written approval. Do not let Lady Blanche describe my departure as a confession, and do not ask me to return until your conduct has changed enough that I do not have to explain the same harm twice. Lawrence stood very still. Done. The final lesson with Lady Imogen was this morning. My duties are complete, I know. Then this letter ends my employment. She placed it on the desk between them. He did not touch it until she stepped back. I am sorry, he said. Not because you are leaving, because I made leaving necessary. Winifred's throat tightened, but she would not soften the consequence merely because he had found the right words. Tomorrow you may begin proving that apology true. The next morning, the sky over Larkstone was grey but dry. Winifred packed 2 gowns, her schoolbooks, the deed custody receipt, the chronology she had drafted, the hornbook, and the small savings she had kept in a locked workbox. She left the certified school evidence with Basil's portfolio because it belonged to the inquiry, not to her private luggage. Mrs. Keene's hired carriage arrived shortly after 8. The widow descended beneath the portico in a brown travelling dress and practical bonnet, carrying no expression of pity. Miss Trescott, she said, taking Winifred's hand, your room is ready. Thank you. You may thank me after you discover whether the bed is tolerable. Lady Imogen appeared at the top of the staircase before Winifred's trunk reached the hall. She came down too quickly for propriety and stopped in front of Winifred, with her face pale from holding back tears. Take me with you. Winifred shook her head. I can't. Lawrence could permit it. That is not the reason. Then what is? Winifred took the girl's hands. Because I will not use your love to punish your brother or strengthen my claim. You are not evidence. You are not a witness I carry from house to house. You are 13, and you deserve to remain outside an adult quarrel. But you are leaving because of him. I am leaving because of a decision he made. That is not the same as asking you to choose between us." Imogen's eyes filled. "Will you write?" "Yes, if your brother permits." Lawrence's voice came from the doorway. "He will." Imogen turned away and pressed one hand to her mouth. Winifred drew her into a brief embrace. "Write your full name," she whispered. "I will answer with mine." Lady Blanche entered as the footman carried the final trunk outside. Her gaze moved from Mrs. Keene to the luggage and settled upon Winifred. "Leaving before the inquiry concludes will be interpreted as flight by those who decided the meaning before I packed." Lady Blanche turned to Lawrence. "County society will assume she fled when challenged." Lawrence faced his aunt. "County society will be informed that Miss Trescott left because I acted without consulting her." Lady Blanche stared at him. "You cannot mean to advertise your own error." "I do. And what am I expected to say?" "Nothing on behalf of Larkstone." His tone remained calm, which made the rebuke final. "You will issue no invitation, letter, explanation, or statement in the name of this household without my written authority. You no longer speak for this house. Because a governess is displeased. Because you used my roof to stage an accusation after being told the evidence was incomplete." Lady Blanche's face stiffened. Winifred looked at Lawrence. This was not forgiveness. It was the first visible cost he had chosen to bear. She inclined her head once, then turned toward the carriage. Basil's junior clerk arrived at that moment on a lathered horse, carrying a dispatch book beneath his arm. He addressed Lawrence, only after first bowing to Winifred. "Miss Trescott's inquiries were sent yesterday evening. Your Grace," one to the York Chronicle, requesting access to the bound issue from the reported year. One to St. Aldwyn's trustees, requesting Mrs. Noakes's exact appointment date. Mr. Crowther asked me to confirm dispatch and say that no statement will be issued without Miss Trescott's written approval. Lawrence looked at Winifred. He had not read her letters. He had not needed to. She had moved the inquiry herself. "Thank you," she said to the clerk. Mrs. Keene settled beside her in the carriage. As the door closed, Imogen stood beneath the portico with Mrs. Pritchard's arm around her shoulders. Lawrence remained one step behind them, holding Winifred's resignation in his hand. The carriage turned across the gravel and entered the long drive. Larkstone disappeared between the beech trees. Winifred pressed her palm over the hornbook in her pocket. She did not feel rescued, vindicated, or certain. She felt wounded enough to grieve, frightened enough to remain cautious, and free enough to continue without waiting for a duke to decide when the truth might proceed. The bound volume had survived because someone at the York Chronicle believed that yesterday's news might one day matter more than the day it was printed. On the morning of the 23rd of September, Winifred stood in a narrow archive room behind the newspaper offices while dust turned slowly in a shaft of window light. Mrs. Keene remained beside the door, her brown gloves folded over the handle of her parasol. Basil Crowther leaned over the long table with the printer's clerk, who had brought out 3 thick yearly volumes from a locked cabinet. Beyond the wall, the presses struck in steady intervals, each mechanical blow carrying through the floorboards. "The clipping must come from one of these issues," Basil said. "We need the complete notice, not a later transcription." The clerk nodded. "These are the bound sheets from the original weekly runs. Nothing has been cut from them." Winifred placed one hand over the hornbook in her pocket. Sir Rupert's fragment had contained only one sentence. Winifred Trescott, aged 10 years, departed this life after a fever. Everything after that had been removed. Somewhere in these volumes, the missing sentence still named the child he had used to bury her. The clerk opened the first book. Columns of marriages, deaths, auctions, lost dogs, servants seeking places, and estates offered for lease passed beneath his finger. Basil searched the dates supplied by Sir Rupert's solicitor. Winifred read every black-bordered notice near the relevant weeks. Twice she saw the surname Trescott and felt her breath stop. Neither entry concerned a child. The third time, Mrs. Keene touched her sleeve. There, the notice stood near the lower edge of the page. Its first sentence was identical to the clipping. Winifred Trescott, aged 10 years, departed this life after a fever. The second sentence followed without a break. The deceased was Winifred Anne, beloved daughter of Mr. Caleb Trescott of Whitby, who fell ill while visiting relatives near Scarborough. For several seconds, no one spoke. The presses continued beyond the wall. Winifred read the notice again, more slowly. Anne, Caleb, Whitby, Scarborough. Not Ruth, not Captain Matthew Trescott, not St. Aldwyn's. The child had not died at school. She had not been Sir Rupert's ward. She had belonged to another branch entirely. He cut after the first sentence, Winifred said. Basil bent closer without touching the page, exactly after it. He did not need to forge anything. Her voice remained quiet. He only needed to remove the sentence that made her a person. Mrs. Keene's face tightened, and leave enough behind to make you disappear. Winifred took the hornbook from her pocket and turned it over in her palm. For my Winifred Ruth, one middle name had been carved into wood with care, another had been cut away from paper with purpose. "Do you know the family?" Basil asked. "I heard the name Caleb Trescott once when I was small. Sir Rupert said he belonged to a Whitby branch with no concern of ours. And Winifred Anne? I was told a cousin died young. I was never told she shared my first name." Basil looked toward the clerk. "We require a certified extract of the entire notice, including the publication date, issue number, column position, and confirmation that the bound volume remains in your custody." "It will be prepared." The clerk brought paper and a ruler. Basil dictated the text exactly as printed. Winifred stopped him once, when he nearly omitted the dash after the surname. "Every mark," she said. "Of course." He began again. The clerk copied the notice, added the archive particulars, signed it, and pressed the newspaper seal into red wax. Winifred watched each step. The original bound volume never left the table. When the extract was complete, the clerk returned the book to the locked cabinet and turned the key. "The full issue stays here?" she asked. "Always, miss." "Good." She had learned to trust records most when no interested person could carry them away. Basil placed the certified full notice inside his evidence portfolio. "This proves Sir Rupert's fragment was taken from the notice of Winifred Anne Trescott." "It proves more," Winifred said. "It proves he knew there was a second sentence." Basil looked at her, because the cut follows the first sentence precisely. "Yes, that will be difficult for him to explain. He will call it family preservation." "He may." Winifred slipped the hornbook back into her pocket. "Then he will have to explain why preservation required the removal of a dead child's father." By the afternoon of the 24th, the rain had passed from York, leaving the cobbled street outside Mrs. Keene's lodgings dark and reflective. Winifred sat in the front parlour with the certified notice on a side table when the maid entered, carrying a calling card upon a small tray. Lawrence Bramford, Duke of Corbridge. Beneath his name, in his own hand, were the words, "By appointment only, if Miss Trescott will receive me." Mrs. Keene read the card over Winifred's shoulder. He has learned to ask. Perhaps he has learned to write the question. Will you see whether he understands the answer? Winifred looked toward the window. She had found the complete notice, without Larkstone's shelter, without ducal authority, and without waiting for Lawrence to decide when the inquiry might proceed. Receiving him would not surrender that independence. It would test whether he recognized it. "Yes," she said, "with you present." Lawrence entered 10 minutes later. Damp marked one shoulder of his black frock coat, though he carried no traveling cloak into the room. He bowed first to Mrs. Keene, then to Winifred. He did not approach until she indicated the chair opposite hers. "Basil told me the full notice has been found," he said. "He gave you the result. Only that the dead child was Winifred Anne Trescott, daughter of Caleb Trescott of Whitby. He said the discovery was yours to explain." Winifred appreciated Basil for that. Sir Rupert's clipping preserved the first sentence and removed the second. The second identified the girl, her father, her branch, and the place where she fell ill. Lawrence looked at the certified extract. Not St. Aldwyn's, near Scarborough. Then Mrs. Noakes's affidavit contradicts the original notice. Yes, he was silent for a moment. "I have come to apologize." Mrs. Keene settled more firmly into her chair, but did not look away. Winifred folded her hands in her lap. "Then speak plainly." Lawrence did. "I acted without your consent. I allowed fear of public disorder and fear of repeating my political disgrace to shape how your name was treated before others. I called the decision caution when it was control." He did not look toward the window or lower his voice. "I was wrong." Winifred felt the truth of the apology before she trusted its endurance. "You also let Sir Rupert's fragment stand beside the school records, as though the two carried equal weight." "I did, and you let the county hear uncertainty as something belonging more naturally to me than to him." "Yes." He offered no excuse. He did not mention Mr. Halford's advice. He did not say he had intended protection. The absence of defense mattered. "I am not asking you to return to Larkstone," he continued. "I am not asking for forgiveness because I have named the harm. I am telling you what I will do. Lady Blanche no longer speaks for my household. No statement will be issued in your name without written approval. Sir Rupert's clipping will be challenged openly. House Bramford's failure will not be concealed." Winifred's fingers tightened once. "Your father's failure, too." The late Duke had kept the settlement in the Bramford deed chest and had received notices that Hazelcombe rents passed through Sir Rupert's agent. He might not have designed the deception. He had failed to question it. "Yes," Lawrence said. "If the records show that my father ignored a duty to inquire, I will say so. Before the tenants, if that is where you choose the truth to be heard. Before county society, yes. Even if they call you reckless again?" A shadow moved through his face, but he did not retreat. "Then they may call me reckless for refusing to protect a lie." Winifred studied him. He looked tired, but not because the woman he desired had nearly lost an estate. He looked like a man allowing shame to alter conduct instead of merely injuring pride. "I believe your apology is true," she said. Lawrence's breath changed. "That is more than I expected. Trust is not restored because the words are correct. I know. It will depend upon what you do when the truth humiliates your family. Then watch what I do." Silence settled between them. Winifred thought of his open hand in the library, offered before he broke his promise. She extended her own hand across the space between their chairs. Lawrence looked at it, then at her. He took only what she offered. His fingers closed lightly around hers and waited. The warmth was familiar. The trust was not yet. Winifred held his hand for 3 quiet breaths, then withdrew first. He released her at once. A knock sounded below stairs before either could speak again. Mrs. Keene's maid entered, carrying a sealed note from Basil. Winifred opened it. The original payroll book at St. Aldwyn's had been found. Mrs. Agnes Noakes had entered the school's employment in March 1841, 6 years after the death she claimed to remember. Winifred looked up at Lawrence. The witness arrived too late, she said, but she was paid to remember anyway. Mrs. Agnes Noakes had entered St. Aldwyn's employment in March of 1841. 6 years after the death, she had sworn to remember. The date stood in the original payroll book with the calm authority of ink that had never needed to persuade anyone. On the morning of the 25th of September, Winifred faced the narrow woman across the trustees' table, while Mr. Fenlow kept one hand beside the open volume. The book would not leave the school. Basil Crowther held only the certified extract prepared from it. Mrs. Keene sat near the window. Lawrence remained several feet behind Winifred, close enough to be present and far enough to show that he had understood the difference between support and command. Mrs. Agnes Noakes. Basil read, appointed junior correspondence clerk in March 1841. He placed the certified extract beside a copy of the death notice published in 1835. Your affidavit claims that you personally remembered the death of the Trescott heiress at St. Aldwyn's. How could you remember an event that occurred 6 years before you worked here? Mrs. Noakes looked down at the black gloves folded in her lap. One thumb had been mended with dark thread. I may have heard about it from older members of staff. That is not what you swore. Basil's voice remained level. You swore that you remembered the child's illness, that you knew Winifred. Trescott and Winifred Hart were separate pupils, and that the Trescott child died at this school. There were stories. Then why did your affidavit call those stories your memory? Mrs. Noakes's lips parted, but no answer came. Winifred looked at the date again, 1841. By then, she had been 15 and had spent 7 years answering to Hart. This woman had not watched 2 girls enter the school. She had not seen either child fall ill. She had not stood near a bed, a chapel, or a burial. Yet at Larkstone, she had allowed her voice to outweigh the life of the woman standing before her. Sir Rupert told you what to say, Winifred said. Mrs. Noakes lifted her eyes. He said the matter would never come to this. To what? To records, questions, people comparing dates. He expected your respectability to be enough. The woman's face tightened. He said His Grace would prevent a scandal once the affidavit existed. Her gaze flickered toward Lawrence. He did not interrupt or defend himself. Winifred noticed that too. What did Sir Rupert give you? Basil asked. Mrs. Noakes clasped her hands more tightly. Nothing for myself. What did he pay? A debt? Whose debt? My late husband's. The answer came in a whisper. There were notes with a lender near Easingwold. The interest had become more than I could manage. How much? Basil asked. Mrs. Noakes named the sum. It was modest beside Hazelcombe's rents, but large enough to frighten a widow with no secure income. Sir Rupert had not purchased a grand conspiracy. He had calculated the exact price of desperation. Did he show you the clipping? Winifred asked. Yes. Only the first sentence? Yes. Did he tell you the full notice named Winifred Ann, daughter of Caleb Trescott of Whitby? Shock crossed Mrs. Noakes's face too quickly to be performed. No. Did he tell you the child fell ill near Scarborough, not at St. Aldwyn's? No. Did he tell you he had paid for Winifred Hart's education from 1833 until 1843? Mrs. Noakes stared at her. No. Basil placed the certified tuition schedule beside the payroll extract. The same guardian who said the heiress died in 1835 continued paying for Miss Hart for 8 more years. Mrs. Noakes's breath faltered. I didn't know. You knew you hadn't witnessed the death, Winifred said. That was enough to refuse. The woman's eyes filled. Winifred felt no pleasure in it. Poverty could explain the pressure. It could not transform falsehood into innocence. Will you correct your affidavit? Basil asked. What will happen to me? That is not mine to decide. A magistrate may consider your cooperation. He will also consider whether you continue a statement you now admit is false. Mrs. Noakes looked toward the original payroll book, then at Winifred. Sir Rupert said the girl claiming Hazelcombe would be paid something privately and sent away. I am not the girl claiming Hazelcombe, Winifred said. I am the woman he trained everyone to call something less. Mrs. Noakes lowered her head. I'll correct it. Under oath? Yes, with the debt payment disclosed, Basil asked. Her hands trembled once. Yes, by the afternoon of the 26th, Mrs. Noakes's corrected statement had been taken before a York magistrate. It recorded that she entered St. Aldwyn's service in March 1841, possessed no first-hand knowledge of any death in 1835, and received payment of her late husband's debts after agreeing to swear that Winifred Trescott and Winifred Hart were separate girls. The original false affidavit remained with Sir Rupert's solicitor until formally produced. The corrected statement became a separate record. In Basil's York chambers, Winifred stood before a long table while rain tapped lightly against the windows. The original settlement deed remained sealed inside the black deed box in the secure inner office. Basil arranged only certified records and working copies before them. The sequence is now simple enough for any listener to follow, he said. He indicated the first document. The deed names Winifred Ruth Trescott. His hand moved to the next. The St. Aldwyn's admission record identifies Winifred Ruth Hart as the daughter of Ruth Hart Trescott, under Sir Rupert's guardianship. The third was the complete death notice. The dead child was Winifred Anne Trescott, daughter of Caleb Trescott of Whitby. The fourth was the payroll extract. Mrs. Noakes did not work at the school until 6 years later. The Hazelcombe rent schedule lay beside them. And Jonas Priest collected rents for Sir Rupert while also paying Miss Hart's tuition. That establishes motive and benefit. Winifred read the sequence in silence. It no longer depended upon resemblance, memory, or social confidence. Each lie had been narrowed until only Sir Rupert remained at its center. Lawrence stood at the far end of the table. The evidence is ready, he said. Where do you want it heard? Basil looked at Winifred, not at the Duke. So did Mrs. Keene. The choice belonged to her. Larkstone had been the place where she was mocked and then restrained. York had given her proof, but not the people most harmed by the deception. Hazelcombe's tenants had paid a man who told them their owner was dead. The estate had produced income while she earned wages teaching another family's child. Hazelcombe, she said, on Michaelmas rent day. Basil glanced toward the calendar. The 29th, 3 days. The tenants will already be assembled. Sir Rupert used their rents to make his story profitable. They should hear the truth where the lie was administered. In the courtyard? Lawrence asked. Yes, before county neighbours as well. Those who heard the accusation should be invited to hear the evidence. Basil drew a blank sheet toward Winifred. What order? She took the pen. The deed first, only to establish the beneficiary's name. Then the school admission and guardian instructions. Then the tuition payments and rent agent records. Sir Rupert should present his own clipping. Basil's brows lifted. You want him to rely upon it publicly? Yes, the full notice matters most when everyone sees exactly where he stopped cutting. Mrs. Snokes after that. First the payroll date, then her corrected statement. Lawrence did not offer to revise the order. And House Bramford's failure? He asked. Winifred met his eyes. Before the tenants are asked to trust any declaration supported by your house, they should hear why your father failed to question the rent arrangements, and why you acted without consulting me at the fete. The old fear crossed his face. It did not become resistance. Then I will say it. In your own words, without changing yours. Winifred completed the sequence and handed it to Basil. He read it once, then passed it to Lawrence. Lawrence returned it without altering a line. This is how it will be done. Basil began drafting notices for the tenants, county witnesses, Mr. Fenlow, the York Chronicle clerk, Mrs. Noakes, Halford, Sir Rupert, and Lady Blanche. He would also request the necessary summons and arrange secure transport for the black deed box on the 29th. When Mrs. Keene and Basil moved into the adjoining office to discuss lodging and travel, Lawrence remained near the table. May I ask you one thing unrelated to the evidence? Winifred folded her chronology and placed it beside Basil's portfolio. You may ask. Will you meet me once before Michaelmas on the 27th? His voice carried no title and no presumption. Not to change the order, not to ask you back to Larkstone as the man who broke his promise and the woman he loves. Winifred's breath caught, but she did not let the words decide for her. You will not use love to ask me to soften the reckoning. I won't. You will not ask me to protect your family's name. No. Then I will meet you once. Lawrence bowed his head, receiving the condition with the answer. On the table between them, the records no longer asked whether Winifred lived. They asked how long a man of rank could profit from pretending she did not. On the afternoon of the 27th of September, Winifred returned to Larkstone for one meeting, and no promise beyond it. Mrs. Keene remained in the adjoining morning room with Mrs. Pritchard, where the connecting doors stood open to satisfy propriety. Beyond them the east terrace lay sheltered beneath a stone arcade. Rain had darkened the garden paths earlier, but the clouds had broken, leaving the air cool and clear. Lawrence waited beside a small iron table. He wore no gloves. A single printed notice rested before him, held at one corner by a smooth stone so the wind could not lift it. He did not approach when Winifred stepped outside. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked once." "I know." She stopped across the table from him, and I agreed to once. "Then I will not waste it." He turned the notice toward her. Her full name stood at the top, in larger type than everything beneath it. Miss Winifred Ruth Trescott requests the attendance of Hazelcombe tenants, neighbouring landowners, and relevant witnesses at Michaelmas Rent Day on the 29th of September for the presentation of records concerning the ownership and administration of Hazelcombe Grange. Beneath it, smaller print named Basil Crowther as solicitor, and stated that the Duke of Corbridge would attend at Miss Trescott's invitation. Winifred read the final line twice. "At my invitation?" "Yes. No ducal crest. No statement that you support my claim. No, Lawrence rested one hand on the back of the nearest chair. My support should not be the fact that makes your name credible. She looked again at the notice. A week earlier, he had spoken before asking what risk she wished to bear. Now even his presence had been placed beneath her authority. The difference did not erase the wound. It proved he had begun to understand its shape. "Who approved the wording?" she asked. "Basil used the sequence you wrote. I altered nothing except the spacing required by the printer. And no copies have gone out without my approval. None. Basil sent the final proof to Mrs. Keene this morning. Your written approval reached him before the press began." Winifred nodded. "What else have you done?" Lawrence did not pretend not to understand. Lady Blanche no longer holds household authority. Every servant and estate officer connected with Larkstone has received written instruction that she does not speak for this house. Has she accepted that? No. Then the instruction was necessary. A brief, grave humor touched his face and vanished. I sent corrections to every guest known to have attended the fete. The letter states that you left Larkstone because I acted without consulting you, not because Sir Rupert disproved your identity. You named your own error, precisely, and Sir Rupert, he offered to repay part of the Hazelcombe income if the matter remained private. Cold anger moved beneath Winifred's ribs. Part. He called the remainder administrative expense. Of course he did. I refused to negotiate. I told him the decision was not mine. Basil has retained the written proposal. Winifred watched Lawrence carefully. You did not refuse on my behalf. No, I told him only that I lacked authority to settle what belongs to you. That answer mattered more than indignation would have done. And the Bramford records? She asked. Lawrence's expression changed. My father received at least 2 notices showing Hazelcombe rents passing through Jonas Preece. There is no document proving that he understood Sir Rupert's identity deception. There is proof that he failed to inquire. Will those notices be presented the day after tomorrow? Yes. Before the tenants? Yes. Even if that becomes the part they remember. Especially then. The old fear did not leave his face, but it no longer governed his answer. Winifred turned toward the wet stone balustrade. The first yellow leaves had gathered at its base. You said your political disgrace taught you to secure every fact before speaking. It did. And what have you learned since the fete? Lawrence drew a slow breath. That I learned the wrong lesson. His voice remained controlled, but nothing in it was guarded. I thought delay always meant discipline. Sometimes it is only fear dressed respectably. Winifred looked back at him. You called it protection, because I was afraid to call it control. The words settled between them without ornament. Lawrence continued. I knew Sir Rupert wanted public confusion. I knew Blanche wanted spectacle. I feared that one sentence from me would be turned into another scandal before the records were complete. So you made the sentence yourself? Yes, and placed me inside it? Yes. He did not excuse himself with Mr. Halford's advice. He did not repeat that he had meant to keep her safe. I am sorry, he said. Not because you left, not because county society saw me fail. I am sorry because I decided what risk you were allowed to bear after promising I would not. Winifred felt anger loosen within her, not disappear. Forgiveness was not a door opened by one correct sentence. It was a path made possible when a person stopped demanding to be excused and began becoming safe. I have not forgotten, she said. I would not ask you to. I may remember it when you believe you mean no harm. Then tell me. I may distrust your caution. Then I will tell you what I fear before I act upon it. Winifred studied him. That will not always be comfortable. No, his gaze held hers. Comfort has not served either of us particularly well. The wind stirred the notice. Lawrence placed his palm over its edge, keeping her name from lifting. He did not reach toward her. "There is something else I must say," he continued. "You told me not to use love to weaken the reckoning. I will not. My culmus will proceed in the order you chose, whether you return what I say or not." Winifred's breath shortened. "Then say it. I love you, Winifred." He spoke quietly, without performance. "I love the woman who corrected a room full of people because North did not become South for their convenience. I love the governess who taught my sister that a name should be written with care. I love the woman who left my house rather than accept affection as another form of obedience." His voice roughened at the edges. "I love your judgment, your courage, and the honesty that has made it impossible for me to remain the man I was before you." Winifred's eyes burned. She had imagined love as rescue when she was young, then learned to fear the price of being rescued by someone who believed gratitude granted ownership. Lawrence offered neither shelter nor rank as the reason she should choose him. He offered himself with the failure included, and no demand that she pretend it had not occurred. "You hurt me," she said. "I know. I trusted you before I understood how much fear governed you. I know. And when I found the full notice, the person I wanted to tell was you." Hope entered his face so quietly that it nearly broke her composure. Winifred stepped around the table. She stopped close enough to feel his warmth in the cool air. Lawrence remained motionless. "May I hold you?" he asked. The question trembled only slightly. "Yes." His arms came around her slowly. Winifred placed her hands against his back and moved into the embrace of her own will. He held her without tightening when she leaned closer, as though closeness was something entrusted rather than claimed. For several breaths, the terrace, the hearing, and the estate receded. There was only the steady rise of his chest and the relief of not having to remain upright alone. When they parted, Lawrence released her fully. He waited. "May I kiss you?" Winifred looked into his face and saw no triumph there, only hope, fear, and restraint. "Yes." She lifted her face, and when he bent toward her, she closed the final distance. The kiss began gently, almost cautiously. Then Winifred touched his cheek, and the tenderness deepened. Nothing in it asked her to abandon Hazelcombe, soften the evidence, or forgive faster than truth allowed. It asked only whether she chose him in that moment. She did. When they drew apart, her hand remained against his face. "I love you, Lawrence," she said. His eyes closed briefly beneath the words. "But I will not accept a proposal while my ownership and authority remain under formal challenge. I will not offer one. And the day after tomorrow, I stand in my own name. The day after tomorrow," he said, "I stand beside it." From the morning room came the deliberate sound of Mrs. Pritchard setting down a teacup. Winifred stepped back, smiling despite the tears she had refused to shed before Sir Rupert. On the table, the public notice remained beneath Lawrence's open hand. Her name appeared first. His followed only because she had chosen to place it there. On the morning of the 29th of September, Hazelcombe's stone courtyard, filled with the people who had been taught to believe its owner was dead. Tenant farmers stood near the granary wall in their Sunday coats. Their wives gathered beneath the covered arcade. County neighbours occupied plain chairs facing the entrance steps, while two long tables held the records in Basil Crowther's custody. No flowers had been arranged. No musicians had been invited. Winifred had refused every ornament that might turn judgment into entertainment. She arrived in a dark blue travelling gown with Mrs. Keene beside her. The hornbook rested in her pocket. Lawrence stepped down from his carriage after her and took his place at her left, not ahead of her. Lady Blanche stood near the first row, with her chin lifted and her hands clasped over the ivory handle of her parasol. Sir Rupert waited beside his solicitor, outwardly composed, though his grip had bent the edge of the dark leather folder beneath his arm. Mrs. Noakes sat near Mr. Halford, her face pale beneath her bonnet. Mr. Fenlow had come from St. Aldwyn's. The York Chronicle had sent the clerk, who certified the full death notice. Hazelcombe's interim steward stood behind the estate ledger. Basil waited until every named witness had arrived, then faced Winifred rather than the Duke. "Miss Trescott, shall we begin?" "Yes." Her voice carried farther than she expected. Basil turned to the gathering. "This is not a trial. No person here will be convicted or dispossessed by speeches made in this courtyard. The records will be presented so that Hazelcombe's tenants understand why its administration is disputed, and so that statements may be preserved before the proper proceedings begin." He indicated the narrow black deed box brought from York in his own carriage. "The original settlement deed has remained in secure custody at my chambers since the 17th of September. Its seals and custody memorandum will now be examined. Lawrence, Mr. Halford, and Sir Rupert's solicitor confirmed the seals against the recorded impressions." Only then did Basil break the wax. He lifted the deed from its blue paper wrapper and unfolded it upon clean cloth. "The beneficiary's name should be read by the woman whose identity has been denied," he said. Winifred approached. She placed no hand upon the parchment. "This instrument was executed on the 12th day of June, 1846, she read. "It settles Hazelcombe Grange, its lands, rents, revenues, and appurtenances upon Miss Winifred Ruth Trescott, only surviving daughter of Ruth Hart Trescott. Possession and beneficial enjoyment to pass upon her 25th birthday." A movement passed through the tenants, not applause, but recognition sharpened by the sound of her full name. Basil next presented the certified extract from the St. Aldwyn's admission book. "The original remains in the school archive," he said. Mr. Fenlow confirmed the seal and signature. Winifred read the copied entry. "Winifred Ruth Hart, aged 8 years, mother, Mrs. Ruth Hart Trescott. Guardian correspondence to Sir Rupert Trescott, Baronet." Basil placed beside it the certified guardian instruction requiring that Hart be used in public lists and that all Trescott family correspondence be withheld without Sir Rupert's approval. "The signature is Sir Rupert's," Mr. Fenlow said. Sir Rupert's solicitor rose. "The use of a maternal surname proves only that a girl called Winifred Hart attended the school." "Then we proceed to the payments," Winifred replied. Basil laid out the certified tuition schedule from 1833 until 1843. The education of Winifred Hart was paid through Mr. Jonas Preece, agent to Sir Rupert Trescott. The interim steward opened a separate schedule. During those same years, Mr. Preece's office received Hazelcombe rents on Sir Rupert's instructions. Mr. Dawes removed his hat. "That's the office we paid, miss." Winifred met his eyes. "You paid the person presented to you as lawful representative. No blame rests upon the tenants." Sir Rupert stepped forward. "All of this remains circumstantial. A charitable ward may share a family name without being the beneficiary named in a settlement." He opened his folder and removed the black bordered clipping. "The true Winifred Trescott died in childhood." Basil did not take the fragment from him. "Present it yourself." Sir Rupert placed it upon the table. Mr. Halford examined it first. The printed line read, Winifred Trescott, aged 10 years, departed this life after a fever. Nothing followed. The paper had been cut immediately after the period. Winifred approached with the certified full notice in her hand. The York clerk stepped forward. The original bound issue remains in the Chronicle archive. This certified extract reproduces the notice exactly and in full. Winifred placed it beside Sir Rupert's fragment and read the second sentence. The deceased was Winifred Anne, beloved daughter of Mr. Caleb Trescott of Whitby, who fell ill while visiting relatives near Scarborough. She turned towards Sir Rupert. The child in your clipping was not Ruth Hart Trescott's daughter. She was not your ward. She did not die at St. Aldwyn's. His expression scarcely changed. Old notices are often copied imperfectly. This was not copied. Winifred pointed to the clean cut. You preserved the first sentence and removed the second. You left the name that resembled mine and cut away the facts that made her another child. A murmur moved through the courtyard. Sir Rupert lifted his chin. A family fragment proves nothing about your identity. The school record proves who I was. The tuition payments prove you knew where I remained. The rent schedule proves your agent profited from Hazelcombe while you represented its owner as dead. Winifred held his gaze. Which child did you bury? Sir Rupert, the cousin named Anne, or the ward named Ruth, whom you continued paying to conceal? For the first time, Sir Rupert looked away. His solicitor spoke close to his ear, but Sir Rupert silenced him with a sharp motion. I acted upon information provided by the school. Then the school witness may speak, Basil said. Mrs. Noakes rose slowly. Mr. Fenlow placed the certified payroll extract before Mr. Halford. Mrs. Agnes Noakes entered employment at St. Aldwyn's in March 1841, he said. The notice was published in 1835. Basil faced her. Could you have witnessed the illness or death described in your affidavit? No. Her answer was scarcely audible. Mr. Halford asked her to repeat it. No, sir. I wasn't employed there. Why did you swear that you remembered it? Mrs. Noakes clasped her reticule with both hands. Sir Rupert paid debts left by my husband. He said the matter would be settled privately. He said no one would compare the dates. Sir Rupert's composure cracked. The woman approached me for assistance. Whatever she swore was her own doing. You gave me the clipping, Mrs. Noakes said. You told me that Trescott heiress died at the school. Basil presented her corrected statement, taken before a York magistrate on the 26th. It admitted that she had no first-hand knowledge and had received the debt payment after agreeing to sign the affidavit. Silence spread through the courtyard. Sir Rupert looked over the tenants and county families as though rank might still restore obedience. Even if errors were made, I preserved Hazelcombe from incapacity. A girl raised for employment could not have administered an estate. I maintained the property while she was educated according to her abilities. The old humiliation did not weaken Winifred now. It clarified her. You kept me capable enough to educate the daughters of gentlemen, she said, but declared me incapable of knowing my own name. You trusted me with languages, histories, children, and household judgment. You withheld only the knowledge that would have made me independent. You would have ruined Hazelcombe. Then you should have taught me. Instead, you taught everyone else that I was dead. Lady Blanche rose from the first row. This display ignores the duty of families to preserve order. A governess suddenly elevated through an old settlement would have caused confusion throughout the county. Sir Rupert's methods may have been imperfect, but the social danger was real. Lawrence stepped forward. He did not stand between Winifred and the witnesses. He stood beside her. No social order worth preserving requires a woman to disappear. Lady Blanche stared at him. Lawrence, you used Larkstone to stage a public accusation after being told the evidence was incomplete. You treated Miss Trescott's silence as convenient. You no longer hold authority in my household, social or domestic. Written corrections will be sent under your name to every person who received your claims. Her face stiffened. You would disgrace your own family for a governess. For the truth, he said. Lawrence then faced the tenants. House Bramford failed Miss Trescott as well. My late father received notices that Hazelcombe rents passed through Sir Rupert's agent, and did not inquire with the care required of a trustee. I repeated that failure when I announced an administrative hold at Larkstone, without asking Miss Trescott what risk she chose to bear. He looked at Winifred. I called fear caution. I was wrong, and I apologize before the people who heard me place her claim in doubt. No applause followed. Winifred had not wanted it. The silence left no place for denial. Mr. Halford rose. I will receive the statements made today. Sir Rupert's solicitor will formally produce the original affidavit. He will also provide a written undertaking that relevant account books, correspondence, and receipts will not be removed, altered, or destroyed. Any tampering will be placed before the proper authorities. Sir Rupert Trescott will receive a summons to appear in York. Sir Rupert's solicitor nodded reluctantly. Basil addressed the tenants. A petition will be filed in Chancery seeking Sir Rupert's removal as trustee, protection of current rents, a full accounting, and recovery of sums found owing. Counsel's present opinion is that Miss Winifred Ruth Trescott is the beneficiary described in the settlement. Mr. Dawes stepped forward with his hat still in his hands. He bowed to Winifred. Miss Trescott, we were told there was no lawful owner living. We know better now. Another tenant bowed. Then another. They did not cheer. They used her name. The interim steward lifted the Hazelcombe estate ledger and brought it to the table. Miss Trescott, will you acknowledge receipt of the current administration schedule? Winifred opened the ledger. The first blank line waited beneath years of entries made for a dead woman's estate. Basil placed the pen beside her hand. She wrote slowly enough that no letter could be mistaken. Winifred Ruth Trescott. When she lifted the pen, Lawrence offered his hand. He did not assume she would take it. Winifred looked once at the signature, then placed her hand in his. Behind them, Basil refolded the original deed along its existing creases and returned it to the black deed box for resealing. Before them, Hazelcombe's tenants stood facing the woman whose name had survived every attempt to cut it short. By May of 1854, Hazelcombe no longer looked like a house waiting for permission to live. The roof above the east wing had been made sound. The kitchens were open. The principal chimneys drew properly, and the shutters no longer remained closed through daylight. Several upper rooms still held furniture beneath linen covers. One corridor smelled faintly of plaster, and the west garden required more labor than money could hasten. Winifred preferred it that way. A perfect restoration completed too quickly would have resembled another story arranged for appearances. Hazelcombe had not been rescued in a season. It had been returned to use one honest repair at a time. Each morning, Winifred crossed the estate office with the current rent schedule beneath her arm and met with the steward before breakfast. Mr. Hargate, the independent solicitor she had chosen in York, reviewed every proposed settlement affecting the estate. The original deed remained in professional custody. A certified copy rested in a locked drawer beneath the Hazelcombe accounts. The estate ledger stood on the shelf behind her desk, bearing the full name she had written on Michaelmas Day. Chancery had removed Sir Rupert Trescott as trustee and placed current rents beyond his reach. The full accounting and restitution proceedings continued, with years of receipts still being examined. At the spring assizes, Sir Rupert had been convicted of conspiracy to defraud and of procuring a false affidavit. He had received a term of imprisonment. The law still styled him Sir Rupert, but the title no longer opened Hazelcombe's office, controlled its tenants, or silenced the niece he had trained the county to consider dead. Mrs. Noakes had received a shorter custodial sentence after correcting her statement and cooperating with the proceedings. Her debts had explained the pressure placed upon her. They had not erased her choice. Lady Blanche Draycott now lived in Bath with a married relation. She had sent written corrections to every guest who received her accusations and held no authority at Larkstone. Lawrence had not restored her position to purchase family peace. He had spent the winter and spring courting Winifred properly. He came to Hazelcombe by appointment, accepted Mrs. Pritchard or Mrs. Keene as chaperone, and never treated the estate as a place that would one day become his through affection. On the afternoon of Winifred's first formal dinner, he found her in the restored East parlour, arranging place cards beside the worn wooden hornbook. Sunlight entered through the tall windows and caught the pale line where new plaster met old moulding. Beyond the glass, the lime trees had begun to leaf. Lawrence paused at the threshold. "Mrs. Pritchard says I may enter." Winifred looked toward the open connecting doors. Mrs. Pritchard sat in the morning room, with a basket of mending, near enough to satisfy propriety and kind enough to study one cuff with remarkable concentration. "Then you have been properly admitted, Your Grace." Lawrence entered wearing a dark blue coat. He carried no deed, no jeweled box, and no bouquet large enough to suggest spectacle. "You have placed me near the bottom of the dinner list." Winifred glanced at the cards. "Only because I had not decided where you belonged." "That is not reassuring. It should not be." His smile softened, then faded as he looked around the room. Fresh curtains framed the windows. Estate correspondence waited on a side table. A carpenter's chalk mark remained near the baseboard where tomorrow's work would begin. "You have made Hazelcombe live again," he said. "Not alone. No, under your authority." The distinction mattered. Winifred set down her pen. "You did not come early merely to admire the curtains." "I do admire them." "Lawrence." He approached until the corner of the card table stood between them. He did not reach for her. "I have spent 8 months considering how not to ask this badly. That is an alarming beginning. It is an honest one." His gaze held hers. "I cannot offer you a home. You have one. I cannot offer you income, safety, or standing, without insulting what you have already secured. I cannot promise that marriage to me will remove scrutiny. It will invite more." Winifred felt her pulse quicken, but she remained still. Lawrence continued. "What I can offer is the truth of what I want. I want a life beside yours. I want mornings in which your work remains yours, and evenings in which you choose to share them with me. I want to disagree without silencing you, protect without deciding for you, and remember that love is not authority." His voice lowered. "Will you marry me, Winifred?" She had imagined the question through winter and refused to answer it, even in private dreams. She would not rehearse surrender before she knew the terms of freedom. Now Hazelcombe stood around her. It belonged to her before the question, and would remain hers after it. "Hazelcombe must be secured for my separate use," she said. Lawrence did not hesitate. "Yes. Not administered through Bramford trustees. No. I will retain Mr. Hargate as my independent solicitor." "You should. The marriage settlement must state that the rents, administration, and succession of Hazelcombe cannot be altered for your convenience." Pride entered his face, quiet and unmistakable. "Basil and Mr. Hargate have prepared a framework. Nothing has been executed. Nothing will be executed until you approve every provision." Winifred studied him. "You prepared for refusal." "I prepared to respect the answer." The last restraint within her did not collapse. It opened. She stepped around the table and placed both hands in his. "Then my answer is yes." Lawrence drew one careful breath, as though joy had arrived with enough force to require discipline. "Yes, yes, Lawrence, I will marry you." He lifted her hands slightly but did not kiss them. "May I kiss you?" "You may." Winifred closed the distance first. The kiss held no desperate claim and no need to prove what had already been spoken. His hands settled lightly at her waist, only after hers reached his shoulders. She kissed him with the certainty of a woman choosing, not yielding. When they parted, his forehead rested briefly against hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." From the morning room came the deliberate sound of Mrs. Pritchard clearing her throat. Winifred stepped back, smiling. "You are still near the bottom of the dinner list. I have survived worse public judgments. You have not yet seen the final arrangement." That evening, Hazelcombe's dining room glowed beneath polished branches of candlelight. The table was not as long as Larkstone's, nor were the walls crowded with generations of Bramford portraits. Winifred had invited the people who belonged to the life she intended to build. Lady Imogen sat midway down the table beside Mrs. Pritchard and spoke earnestly with Mr. Dawes about the correct spelling of his youngest granddaughter's name. Basil Crowther attended with his wife. Mr. Hargate sat opposite the Hazelcombe steward. Several tenants and neighbouring families filled the remaining places without being divided into those considered useful and those considered ornamental. Winifred stood at the head of the table before taking her chair. For one brief instant, she remembered the far end of Larkstone's dining room, the service door at her back, and laughter moving toward her because she had dared to know where Hazelcombe stood. The memory remained. It no longer governed the room. A servant waited to draw back the chair at Winifred's right. But Lawrence did not assume it belonged to him. He remained standing until she looked toward him. Winifred had written every place card herself. Beside her plate lay the hornbook, worn smooth by her mother's hands and her own, for my Winifred Ruth remained faintly visible upon the reverse. At her right stood a single card bearing one name in her careful hand. Lawrence. She lifted it and placed it before the waiting chair. "Your Grace," she said, allowing formality to carry what tenderness did not need to display. "I believe this is your place." Lawrence looked at the card, then at her. "Because I am a duke?" "No. Because I am your future husband?" "Not entirely." Winifred smiled. "Because I choose you there." He bowed before taking the seat, not the shallow inclination of rank toward courtesy, but the acknowledgement of a man receiving a place another person had freely given. Winifred sat at the head of her own table. The first course was served. Conversation rose around her, warm and imperfect, touched by the ordinary sounds of silver, china, and people no longer required to pretend that comfort mattered more than truth. Beneath the edge of the tablecloth, Winifred reached toward Lawrence. He did not seize her hand. He turned his palm upward and waited. She placed her hand in his.